Yeah, I was living down with a guy named Pat Boyd. This place is called Boydland. It's down by Gorda, south of Gorda, right on the cliffs over the coast. My sister was living in Mill Valley. She was in about 62 or 3 or something. No, it was 62. And she had just come. She knew these people because there were connections with Dick Bach and Hollywood together. Because seems to be married to Alicia. McPherson, Amy Semple McPherson's granddaughter. Mm-hmm. And she was this fascinating person that I met when I was visiting in Hollywood. And she was living in Big Sur with Pat Boyd, and she was met her at the time. So I wanted to see this place that I'd heard so much about. They had an organic vegetable farm right in the cliffs overlooking the ocean, and this guy was building these houses for them and everything. So eventually, I went with some friends, a bunch of my New York friends, down to the Monterey Jazz Festival, I guess. And I got them to make a little trip with me down to the coast to look for this place. And we found it about dusk. And none of the principals were there, but Leonidel Romero was there. And they were connected with the LA art scene. And he was telling me all this stuff about the stellium. There was this conjunction of the planets that was coming up, the world was going to end. It was a big deal in 62. People in India were doing crazy
stellium?
things. It's called the stellium, yeah. And he said this was going to be the beginning of a new age, and everybody thought the world was going to blow up, but no, it wasn't going to do that. And he thought maybe there could be a war, but, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I met this land, at least, and I went back there on my own when the stellium actually happened. It had a particular date. It involved an eclipse, a solar eclipse.
Oh, yeah.
So I rode my motorcycle down to this place. I thought I wanted to be there when this happened. So there didn't seem to be anybody around. I was sitting on the cliff, watching the sunset. My sister was on the Matson liner out working as a waitress out on Hawaii somewhere, and I was imagining what it looked like to her from the middle of the Pacific. And the sun went across, the moon went across the sun, and I had the weird impression that it stopped and went back the other way. I don't know why I thought that. But anyway, I saw Pat Boyd when I was stuck on a cliff. I'd gone down to the beach. There's no easy way to get there. You climb on this cliff. And I got hung up and all by myself. And I see Pat Boyd come out to the edge, and I kind of called to him, but he didn't hear me. And then, I don't remember how I actually met him, but I think eventually I did. And I remember what it was. The most amazing thing, this fellow Barry Byer told me about. He ended up having a life crisis. His wife, his kid left him and all that. And he was suicidal, and I hooked up with him, and he had a Volkswagen with a sunroof. And I wanted to go up north to the Lost Coast, which I'd never been to. Nobody had. None of our friends had ever been up there yet. And I was working at Standard Oil at the time, looking at maps, trying to figure out where I was going to go when I got a little money, where I was going to buy my piece of land on the coast. Because I'd already seen this place in Big Sur, and I wanted something like that. And I saw this proposed shoreline highway. That's what they call the Usol Road on the oil company map. And I thought, wow, that looks interesting. So when my friend needed to take a break, we headed north. And we couldn't find the road going north because it's very tough to find it just past Rockport there. But we made it all the way up to Fortuna or somewhere, and then coming south, we were able to find it. Ooh. So we drove the whole thing, and it was just an amazing trip. And I had some peyote. This was in '69 probably.
Oh, it had to be. We're in '62, I thought.
Huh? No, this was before.
Oh, this was before. Okay.
I was telling you how I found this place in Big Sur. And so we were headed down the coast and doing this peyote and everything. We got to Monterey finally, and we slept in the ice plants by the marine lamp. And then in the morning we headed south down to Big Sur. And I was going to try and find this Boydland, see if I could spot it. Because it's very hard to see from the highway, even though it's right there next to it, between the highway and the cliff. And we finally got down there, and this time Alicia Tree, that's who Kate McPherson had changed her name to Alicia Tree, and she had this beautiful little girl named Heidi, and she was living with Richard Debris, this musician. And they invited us in, and it was just this beautiful little house made out of all salvage materials and everything. It was the first time I'd begun to experience this philosophy of building. And Pat had built this stuff, and he had subsequently separated and moved up the mountain and had another place up there, which I didn't see till much later. But he had a Sanilac can full of peyote buttons, and he started mashing those up. And so we did some more peyote. And then I had the most amazing experience of my life, even to this day, I think, just being with these people. And we talked about all kinds of things, and they introduced me to Rudolf Steiner's philosophy of organic gardening, and they went into the anthroposophist movement. And all
The what movement?
Anthroposophist. It's a bunch of people in Hollywood and Southern California.
Okay.
It's related to Steiner and even Madame Blavatsky and all
sure.
that stuff.
Oh, sure. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they were familiar
Yeah.
with that, and I got a little taste of that. And I remember they had this book that I've never been able to find called How Trees Multiply. And it was by Steiner, and it was the most amazing book because it's really a horticulture book, and yet it was obviously he was talking about everything.
Metaphysics.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, that was a revelation. I realized that no matter what you're talking about everything. Even if it's a technical subject.
Interesting.
And,
Very interesting. That's profound. Yeah.
And I've never been able to find that book. It may be actually I got it all wrong. It might be another title.
Yeah. Well, that'd be fun to track down. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, we spent this
Great
incredible
time
night
together.
there.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I went back to that place when my sister told me that there was a help wanted sign. So I headed straight for there from Mill Valley, and this was in '62. So that's how I ended up in Big Sur, being his gopher, his donkey. We were building something like I have here now, terraces using the incredible stones that they have in Big Sur. We'd drive this old 49 International pickup down to the beaches and load them up with stones, and then get them back there and build them into these terraces, these curving terraces. It was beautiful stuff. Pat was just a genius, you know. And he was, his mother,
last name again?
Pat Boyd. His mother
yeah.
was Madge Boyd, Mad Madge as we called her, because she was out there. But she had been Marion Davies' personal hairdresser, and they had all lived at the Hearst Ranch, San Simeon,
Yeah.
when Pat was a boy. And then she married the
That
president
must have been a
of
big
Oakland
influence on him.
Yeah.
That vibe of that place, sure.
Yeah. So he had studied a lot of Eastern philosophy and architecture and everything, and he was way into organic farming, and had just built this beautiful little place. It had its own water, made a little spring, the best water you can imagine coming out of the mountains of Big Sur. And
What part of Big Sur was that at?
it's south of Gorda.
Okay, oh yeah,
It's
you
on the
mentioned
point
it.
south of Gorda.
Let's jump ahead to did this influence your geodesic, did you get some kind of familiar?
The first geodesic dome I ever saw was when I was a student at Cal Poly in '57,
Okay.
'58. They had a geodesic dome there, and I was in the aeronautical engineering department, but I hung out with all the architects. And so I was fascinated with this thing, you know. And it was one of these kind that are made out of sort of like orange wood for nurseries now, only bigger,
Yeah.
tubing and stuff. And it was just fascinating to me. I had no idea how it was done or anything. And over the years, I always noticed whenever there was a picture of one. And then
Did you ever meet Buckminster?
I did meet
Buckminster
Bucky. Well,
Fuller?
I didn't actually meet him. I attended one of his lectures years later with Sally. It was interesting. It was at the Berkeley Community Theater. He's a marvelous speaker. He can go on for hours and hours and hours. And he is a living embodiment of talk about anything, you're talking about everything.
Yeah, I've heard he's an genius,
Yeah,
total
he is.
amazing,
He's a wonderful
consummate person.
And then he's basically, his philosophy was that there's plenty to go around. This Malthusian doctrine of survival of the fittest is a crock of shit. And all we have to do is act rationally, and we can design our way out of anything. You know?
Yeah.
And so
Cooperation.
yeah,
Hey.
and that war and everything is totally unnecessary. It's just a lack of imagination, basically.
Yeah.
And Sally was into this TM stuff, you know,
Right.
Maharishi.
Right.
And so she wanted to go to the same place a couple of weeks later when Maharishi was there. So we went there, and this time, here's this guy sitting up on the stage with all these flowers around him, and everybody's adoring him and all that. And he starts out by saying that it's like the spiritual bank. You must go to the bank, but he starts right off with the bank, and then he ends up with people asking him questions. And of course, this is the middle of the street battles in Berkeley over the anti-war protests, And so the guy says, what should we do about the draft, about the war? And he says, obey your government.
Yeah.
And I thought, what a rock decision. Yeah. But what a wonderful comparison between these two guys. One of them was supposed to be so spiritual, and the other guy was thought of as some kind of a technical
formula, spiritualism.
Yeah, and
formula.
The opposite.
Yeah, robot.
Yeah, but anyway, so I was interested in Bucky, and I happened to be in another a jail experience for a protest. I think it was the. Let's see, which one was it? I don't know, because Ginger wasn't in at that time. It must have been one. Anyway,
Albion, the Lion.
It could have been one of the Livermore things, or Diablo Canyon. But this was once when she was out with a kid, and I was in, so I didn't get to go. But they went to the Santa Cruz auditorium and saw him speak. And by this time, I had already built some plyodomes, which were based on his work. It was a development of his work that I participated in. And so I had made these little cardboard models, and Ginger thought to take one with her to this thing, and then went and got him to sign it, autograph it. So for a while, but he signed it with one of these magic marker things, and it faded. It completely faded away. It was a red magic marker, and it totally faded away, which is kind of cool.
Kind of a Buddhist thing, huh?
But that's
the impermanence of things, and the beauty of things like geodesic domes, which are not made to be forever, but they're made
biodegradable.
Yeah, they're biodegradable, so it's very Buddhist.
But I actually had worked with Paulo Soleri before I got serious about geodesic domes. I was living with Ellie in Canyon, and I guess it would have been about 65.
Yeah, the place that you had down the hill?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hadn't done much
to it. The hyperbolic collaboration.
I hadn't really done anything to it. It was still, I had just, in 67 is when Water Brothers was formed.
Okay.
When it became ours.
Okay.
I was already remodeling it, but not with any great plan in mind. Just doing a few things to it. And so this was 65. So this is before the Water Brothers. And I'm just a renter, And I was just starting to work in construction. I got a job with Bob Callaghy, who's a Catholic worker, Catholic anarchist group. Sure. And Callaghy had Calco Davis Construction. Fast is right was their motto. And they were doing remodeling in the Berkeley Hills, and I started working with him. And then he took off for Mississippi. And he went there with one of the Freedom Summer things in 64. And when he came back, he had the Quakers sponsored it. And he came back and he was just telling me that what was going on there. And it was just amazing, He said, that's really what's happening. He said, these people are going to end up coming to California and teaching us because, there's a lot happening there. And so the next year, it turned out that a bunch of friends of mine in the IWW, I'd been a member of the Wobblies for years, but all my friends in the Wobblies were living up in, by this time we're living up in Albion. And they had hooked up with the Quakers, and they were going, if you can imagine, a bunch of Wobblies going to Mississippi to rebuild bombed churches. I mean, usually they're thought of more as bombing churches than rebuilding bombed churches, but at this time, the churches were where the voter registration was taking place in the South, and so they were burning them left and right.
Right, and this had to be 1964.
64.
Yeah, Mississippi summer.
And okay, well in 65 we were it was the Selma March was coming up.
Yeah.
And in 65 you had the Birmingham bombing,
right,
where the 6 girls were killed. and you had Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman being murdered.
Right, and that all happened in the same year, didn't it?
Yeah, it did, 65, and this is the year that we were going there we weren't going to be in the summer months, we were going to be in someplace in Mississippi rebuilding a bomb church, that's all we knew. And so, on the way, I had my first independent job in Berkeley. The guys that I was working for passed it on to me. It was one that they didn't really want to handle, and it was in the Berkeley Hills, an old Tudor-type place. This family wanted the basement turned into a bathroom, and could I do it? So the idea was, as I saw it, was to dig it out and do some concrete work, redo all the pipes. And my girlfriend was working at the pot shop at Cal in Volcas, and it was possible for me to make custom tiles.
Oh yeah.
And so I designed this thing with a sunken tub, and the whole thing was like a grotto. And I did something else which I never even attempted anything as ambitious as this ever again. But it was an incredible job. You know, my first try, I didn't know what wasn't possible. You know, so I just did everything. It had a custom tile grotto with I had a 2CV at the time, and I went out in the fire trail and got this big old Madrone thing in a big S shape that went all across the room and held a sink over here. And I got all these antique plumbing fixtures with this Berkeley trading post that used to be down there in Adeline. And so I got all this stuff and was building this thing. And this Australian guy, Mark Ground, who was an architecture student at Cal and hung out with us at the pot shop, heard about this and he wanted to take a look at it. So he came over and he said, wow, you know, this reminds me of this guy Paolo Soleri out in Arizona. And so, yeah, and he said, only he does it on a little larger scale. He uses earth-moving equipment and piles up the sand and everything and then covers it with concrete and moves the sand out and something else. I said, really? And it was fascinating to me. So
you ended up going there eventually.
Well, we went there with this trip to Mississippi. We detoured to Soleri's place near Scottsdale. Yeah. And met him, and then he said, "Well, where are you guys headed?" And this was in February, and I said, "Well, we're going to Mississippi to rebuild this bomb church." And his Italian soul was touched by this, you know. And he said, "Oh, well, one of you can come and work for me and not have to pay me this summer, you know."
Right, because generally you usually had to pay him to work there.
$70, because you get credits. You know. It's usually architecture students. Right. So I took him up on it.
Did you go rebuild the church, by the way?
Yeah, we did.
Great.
And we didn't get blown up or shot or anything. You know, a lot of close calls. But, you know. Anyway,
you came back to Arizona.
And came back to Canyon, and then in the summer, in June, Ellie and I packed up the 2CV and our dog and everything and headed for Soleri's, and he'd forgotten all about it, but then he said, "Oh, well, you can just park out there." And we set up a little camp in the desert nearby and worked with him for a month or two, I don't remember. And it was a real education, and especially in concrete, and just architecture and everything else. I mean, Paolo Soleri is a marvelous guy.
So that's where you learned about ferro cement?
Ferro cement, well, actually not ferro cement so much, but all kinds of concrete work. Anyway,
you brought
I think he might still be alive.
You brought that home to Canyon.
Yeah, so that really stimulated me to build and to apply all these things that I've been learning, and I began to focus a little bit. And so I came up with a plan. John Adams and I were sitting around one day. I was scratching on a tablecloth or something, and all of a sudden it hit me how to do this. These 4 hyperbolic paraboloids out of eucalyptus poles that would all be interconnected over this thing. That I would use the house, which was just this little cabin. It's only 13 feet by 28 feet with a little bedroom underneath it. And I would make it into a 28-foot square, you know, 4 14-foot hyperbolic paraboloids interconnected over this thing. And I'd use the house as a scaffolding and then tear it down afterwards once I got the roof up. And that's the way I did it. And it worked out great.
Yeah.
And Fred was the only one that understood what I was doing.
Wow, amazing. Now, you had a lot of people that used to come and hang out in Canyon during that time. This was the late 60s, I think, right? Pretty much.
Yeah.
Late 60s. And I'm thinking, I remember You had some political heavies come out. Huey Newton visited you once, right?
No.
Not Huey Newton,
No,
okay.
Well, actually, let me think about that. I know Louise, Tina's mom. She came out and visited me when she was living with Eldridge Cleaver. That's what
Eldridge Cleaver.
And she wanted, and he was on the lam, and she wanted him to come and stay at my house. And I said, "Are you kidding?"
you still want to keep your a little low profile.
He picked Algeria instead.
Okay. But a lot of very interesting people and times were had. I was in.
Yeah,
remember
Sergeant
those
Sunshine
times.
came out. You know, I don't remember him, but he was out there, and
those are the earlier days.
I can't remember any
Country
of the
Joe and the
other
Fish lived out in Canyon.
Country Joe came out with Janis Joplin just
Yeah.
after she cut her first hit, you know.
Yeah.
And they hung out with me out there.
Janis Joplin came out too.
Oh yeah.
Cool.
We had a bottle of Red Mountain there and a couple of joints, and
yeah.
she had her Southern Comfort. And
even without the famous names, there was always a coterie of very interesting people hanging out at your place around the fire. Gary Snyder and
Dan and Louise Welch were living next door for the summer.
Oh wow!
And they were Zen Buddhists.
Yeah, I know.
That's why Gary came. He came to visit them.
Yeah.
And then we all went down to
sure.
the Zen Center down in Tasahara for their wedding. They were the first monks to ever be married in a Zen Center. And Roshi, what was his name?
Baker? Was it Baker or
the
one?
guy, the Japanese.
Oh, Suzuki Roshi.
Suzuki Roshi,
yeah.
Yeah, he married them. He was the first one probably the first, Zen
wedding
guy ever to marry monks.
One of the things I remember about that hyperbolic Polaroid dome was the big the center fireplace that was built in a a culvert, right?
Collar for joining people.
And then eventually the open roof, so you could see the stars in the sky. Only part of it was covered.
Well, the roof really wasn't. There were vents in the roof.
Yeah.
You couldn't see much out of that. What you could see out of there were no walls.
Right, no walls, exactly. You could look out
on the upper level.
Some direction.
There were partial walls, but it wasn't enclosed. The downstairs room enclosed somewhat. And I always enjoyed living in the open because this place I was telling you about, I lived in Big Sur. When I was living with Pat Boyd, I lived in a little shack, tiny little shack. And it had 3 walls. And the 4th wall was looking out right over, I was, probably 500-600 feet up above the Pacific, straight below,
Wow, how beautiful.
I could see the Japan from there, and I just never could stand to have a western wall. In fact, I still don't. That wall over there is wide open in my bedroom.
Great.
This is California. It doesn't get that cold. I mean, it gets uncomfortable, but it won't kill you.
We don't have a lot of time left, so what I want to do now is I want to ask you what you feel were the most politically significant kinds of things that you were involved in, particularly as related to Canyon.
Well, in Canyon, of course, all this activity, I was regarded with a great deal of suspicion by the old-timers when I moved in because of my activity. And so I got a lot of visits from the sheriffs and whatnot. But eventually, all these people came around, I would have to say, and became good friends.
And George Menchie's changed his kind of being, coming over to our side.
Well, he was a naval investigator.
Yeah, and that helped because he embraced us.
He had 7 daughters. He didn't have a chance.
Yeah.
7 beautiful daughters. What's he going to do?
Yeah.
He even called the cops on John Mills when he was going to his daughters. Yeah. But that was the last nasty thing he ever did. After that, he became an absolute saint. Really.
Well, he may have been onto something there, though. Actually, stories I heard later about John Mills, but never mind.
Well, anyway,
we won't go into that.
Anyway, the Shalleys, the Seeds, a few of them were constantly bugging the county officials to do something about us, about me in particular, the Engels. And so eventually they did. By this time, there were quite a number of us out here, and we had completely turned around the water company program. We had managed to get another piece of property out from under the trooping deal, you know.
Right.
And it was becoming clear that we could save this place. We got the store trust. We managed to buy that when the water company practically
rebuild the store.
And we did that by having that happening. Remember that happening?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what year was that happening?
That would have had to be
69?
around, no, it was earlier.
Yeah, it was earlier, wasn't it? 68 maybe.
68 would be my guess.
I think so.
And 10,000 people came out here, and
Yeah.
no harm was done. And all these wonderful people performed for free, and we raised about $15,000 cash, which was enough to buy the store trust.
And Tom and I moved in with our
Yeah,
4 kids
lived there.
to that Canyon store.
I still remember
And it was
took off the
rebuilt.
puppy by his ears.
Oh, it was rebuilt around us
Yeah.
as we tried to live there. And in fact, I can remember one wall on the backside was completely gone.
Yeah.
It was freezing cold Thanksgiving weekend. And
That was all done on a Thanksgiving weekend.
exactly. And
Yeah.
by the time the county inspectors came around,
It was
the
done.
idea was the family being in place there. They couldn't do anything for 3 months
Yeah.
to cause the shutdown of buildings. So that
And it
worked.
was all done to code, and it was wonderful. Of
Yeah,
course, it
and
all
plus
burned down a year later.
The store got built during that time. It was a nice little Canyon arts and crafts store that
Yeah.
Tom and I kept going for a while. And
Right.
then in the new post office, but then that all,
So obviously there was a lot of potential for conflict with the county, and there were several incidents. There was that kid that had run away from a juvie who was some of the ladies of Canyon. He was so pretty, we were taking care of him. And the cops came out, and he happened to be at my house when they showed up, and he tried to escape out the back, which is a route I had used on a similar occasion once. And they were waiting for him down there in the bushes, and they grabbed him. And there was a trial, and there was always something, you know. Tim Biggins was out here then, and Don
Saber.
and there was constant little friction with the county over nothing really. You see, that was a period when there was this big lifestyle war going on.
Right.
The culture war, which is still going on. But they were pouring it on them. They were using building codes to force people off their land all over the
Including building codes, according to Deva, that I recall, that had to do with the luminance volume of a light bulb.
Yeah, anything.
That because people they use kerosene lamps, it wasn't going to be applicable, so we couldn't pass that building code.
Well, the problem is you couldn't get building permits.
Right.
So it was a catch-22.
Right.
See, they figured, all right, we got them. We'll just run them out. But they did this at Morningstar, which was owned by a rich guy, Lou Gottlieb, the musician with the Kingston Trio and the Limelighters.
Limelighters, right.
Yeah, Limelighters. He bought this land up in Sonoma and was doing something similar, and they actually shut him down. He deeded it to God, and that didn't even work. And then there was the Wheeler Ranch.
The Wheeler
This
Ranch,
was another
right.
kid that had a lawyer that followed him around with a briefcase, and he came out and visited just to see how we were managing to survive. And they shut him down. And so we were facing some serious effort
Right.
to close us out by using building codes and things. And so ultimately what happened was I guess this would have been 69. I don't remember.
William Bennett was pulled in
Well, that
to,
was later, but the raid that they put together was really something. They had about a dozen sheriff's cars, including dog catchers, narcs, and building inspectors, and all these sheriffs. And they all showed up one day down at the post office, and a bunch of our people happened to be down there, and they tried to engage them and slow them down a little bit. And Sally's, by then, husband,
George.
He's one of these guys who always has an armband and a megaphone, at the demonstrations and EFSM demonstrations. So he's trying to talk to them about our constitutional rights, and they're pushing him aside and heading up the hill, So I'm running up the hill as fast as I can go, and I go by the Vigil House, which by this time had become the location for social change. And they had a bus that they were stripping out, and all the seats were piled up to the side of the road, and I threw all the bus seats out in the middle of the road to slow them down.
Right.
And they came out there and said, "Hey, yeah, you can't do that." So I kept going up the hill, and I got up to the top of the hill, and we had a huge pile of timbers that we'd gotten from this lumber yard that they were closing out. Big old timbers, massive things. And I was using them to rebuild my house. And Frank Lenahan, this crazy motorcycle guy from Oakland, always with crazy fright wigs and everything. And
Motorcycle Frank.
The absolute madman. He was too far out for the Hells Angels. They called him Loose. That was his nickname. And he happened to be up there, and so did Sabra,
Right.
Tim's wife, who was pregnant at the time. And Tim, I think, was in Santa Rita for draft evasion. And so we got to the top of the hill, which is where my house is.
And you built this
And we just immediately, without anybody saying anything, we just
barrier.
started dragging these timbers out into
Yeah.
the road. And we made this huge barricade of nothing flat, you know. And then there was a cow skull there. We plunked that on top of it, and then there was a hard hat. We put the hard hat on the cow skull. And then Sabra, you know, she mounts the whole thing and defiantly waits for them to reach the top of the hill. And Frank Lenahan goes over and hides behind some of the other timbers, and I didn't know till later that he had a goddamn gun.
Yeah, that's one of the stories David tells is the shot goes off and the cops don't know where it's coming
I
from.
didn't know that.
They didn't know where it was coming from, and they are scared,
I
petrified.
didn't know about the shot. Maybe if we put this thing over it.
No, that's fine.
Okay, so the cops are coming up the hill, and they make it around the corner of Jono's, one after the other. These police cars are coming up, and then lo and behold, behind them is every Volkswagen, every hippie contraption that'll move in Canyon. And of course, this is a narrow road, and there's no way to turn around once you get past Jono's place. So up the hill they go, and then they get up to the top, and there's this big barricade of timbers. So
Right.
they're stuck. They're stuck on that hill. And that hill happens to be on the backside from, once you reach the crest, you can see Mount Diablo. But down where they are, they're probably in some kind of radio shadow.
Right, and then on the other side, as we know, just because this is oral and not a film of what is it like over there,
Over, you coming up the hill?
McCosker side.
On the Cosco side, well, there's Indian Valley there, and then there's a series of ridges and valleys that go all the way to Mount Diablo, which you can clearly see to the east. And of course, Mount Diablo is where my uncle built the police radios for the sheriff's department. You know, the year I was born started, you know, and they can be heard in New York City, but you can be in little shadows and things where radios are worthless. And I have a suspicion that maybe these guys were in one of those little shadows.
They were in a pocket.
Mm-hmm. And so they were really kind of screwed. And apparently somebody had fired off a shot. I think it was from Frank Lenahan. And at some point, and just to let them know, I guess. And so they were really behaving themselves.
They were scared. They were petrified, is what I heard.
First, they had to get out of their cars, which they really hate, and then they had to walk up the rest of the way, and over to my house was the first stop. You know?
Wow.
And of course, they just walked right by. They didn't even come in. And George was leading them by this time.
George Carrer?
Yeah, the armband guy, you know. And he's leading them on a merry tour on the fire trail and took them through every poison oak pass you could think of, and finally down to several of the places that were on their list over by Tim Biggins' place. So they did their little job. They posted a few of them with red tags, maybe about 7 of them altogether, I think.
Oh, so they actually did do some action that day.
And, well, they didn't enter anybody's house. They just stuck these things on the door and moved on, you know. And the dogs didn't go sniffing around. The narcs didn't try to, kick anybody's door in. They were really polite, really nice, and they went, as quickly as they could get the fuck out of Dodge.
Back for territory, back for another country.
They made some serious tactical blunders, you know.
Yeah.
Of course, this was in the day before they were all RoboCops, you know. These were ordinary people wearing police uniforms, with the exception of a few of them. So they weren't really loaded for bear. They came out here to mess with people, but when they ran into some opposition, they beat a tactical
They
retreat,
behaved
let's
like
say.
gentlemen.
Yeah, they made the best of a bad situation.
Well, that's a very cool story. Now, Barry, I want to ask you something here, because you went through all that, and I remember hearing one story of another action that took place in Canyon where nails had been put into pieces of wood and left out on the upper road when the police were supposedly on their way. In fact, they did come out.
I hope there's a statute of limitations on this shit. But, no,
Maybe it wasn't you, maybe it's somebody
maybe it
you
was
had heard of
somebody
somebody
I
who
knew.
had done that. Yeah.
But there are these things called Z-nails. It's something that you use. It's something that you use to hang stuff.
Remember, Richard Nixon, don't
construction.
incriminate you.
Yeah, you don't have to.
You know, there are these Z-nails. It's a piece of sharpened wire, both ends, and it's bent. There's a 90-degree bend on each end, but in opposite, well, not opposite, but 90 degrees to each other. So you have a thing that goes like that. That's called a Z-nail.
Right, got it.
And if you toss it on the ground, it's possible that the points will end up down in some kind of crazy position, but
Right.
9 times out of 10, it's going to land with at least one point sticking up. And
So the road got Z-nailed that day.
was it that day?
Was it that day or another time?
Well, it probably was
Another time. It was another bus. What would that have been?
Well, what
I can't remember.
that results in a slow leak in the tire, and by the time the guy gets down in the grove on his way back, you know, then he gets the flat. He's kind of in a bad spot too. But you know, we also used those at People's Park. That's when we, with Tom. When Nixon invaded Cambodia, or Kissinger, I should say, when Kissinger invaded Cambodia, the university, the campus, basically went on strike, and they started cranking out posters and things, and I thought I could help with that. I know how to make posters, so I was going to go down to the university, and I also had thought about. This was after the People's Park occupation at Berkeley, the military occupation at Berkeley, when Reagan was governor for 17 days with the National Guard and the razor wire and machine gun nests and all that stuff. What they referred to during the Reagan death orgy that we just went through, when they did refer to that,
Right.
It was a student strike, they called it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
He restored order to the campus. During the student, they didn't say that they murdered a guy and blinded another one,
Right.
and shot a dozen people,
Right.
all unarmed protesters.
Right.
Anyway, after that, I figured, well, the next time the National Guard comes, I'm going to...
People's Park.
Yeah. Over People's Park, yeah.
Right.
So this was after People's Park, and this is the invasion of Cambodia, and I said, well, this is going to bring the National Guard. So John Adams had a BSA motorcycle, and we heard what was going on when we were, all of us were over at John's, or maybe you guys were living there then.
Yeah.
One or the other of you were living at John's place.
Both of us. Oh, you mean John?
Anyway, John
Yeah.
Adams was there, and his motorcycle was there, and Tom and I were there. And he couldn't come, but he let me borrow his fucking motorcycle, his BSA for this. And I thought, wow. And so I had a Army fatigue jacket, and I filled the pockets with these little bundles with a rubber band around, 10 of those things.
Mm.
I had them in bundles of 10 with rubber bands around them. And when they were needed, I just took the rubber band off and tossed them out on the road, and I knew that there were 10 there. And then after whatever was going on was over, I'd go out and try and
Recoup
find 10.
them. Uh-huh.
Because I didn't want to leave them out there for,
Right. Posterity.
yeah, for anybody to
Right.
just get a flat, And also to give you a clue, if you'd scored anything, if you only found 8, you knew something happened. Well, anyway, I had several of these bundles, and I grabbed them and stuck them in my pockets. And Tom filled his pockets with roofing nails, because John Adams was a roofer, so I found roofing nails in them. And Tom ended up driving, and I was on the back. And we headed in, and the plan that I had worked out was to take that, the last, when you're going to to San Francisco from Oakland, the last exit goes off to Berkeley, right?
Mm-hmm.
That one, and that's such a little exit, and it's the whole deal. If they're coming from Santa Rita or any place, they're going to make that.
That was good, interesting
So I figured that
visualization
that would
work
be
there.
a good one to,
Yeah.
to block, you know. So we were, the traffic was all stopped around there, and we went off to the right, and we're passing them, you know, on the motorcycle, heading around that overpass. And I was going to start throwing these things down at the bottom so that hopefully it would block the Bay Bridge and everything. At least slow them down, you know. I mean, we have to do something. So, lo and behold, there's a CHP right in this line of stop traffic on this overpass thing as we're coming along. So I just reached in and got some of these things, and whap, I threw them down the ground under the cop car. I could hear him bounce up and hit the bottom of the thing, you know. And so we just kept going, and this guy manages to pull out and get on the shoulder too. There was just enough room for him. And he gets out and starts chasing us. I said, oh, fuck it. So we're headed down towards Albany, and still on the side of the road. And he's over on the side of the road too. And he's roaring along behind us. And so we're heading for the Albany, the Gilman Street track by the racetrack, and the racetrack was letting out. So there was a humongous amount of traffic.
God.
And I was all for taking the Gilman thing and going for it, but Tom was driving, and he made the wise decision to pull over, because here they come from the Golden Gate Field side on motorcycles.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would have had us, you know. But we just pulled over, just as, you know, when the guy got close, put on his lights and everything, just pulled over. And so he walks up and he says, I'm going to give you a ticket for going on the side of the road. You're not supposed to do that on a motorcycle. So he's completely unaware, and he's going, you know. So I'm sitting on the back, and there's Tom, and he's going to write us a ticket and everything. And here comes this motorcycle cop goes the other way, and then he turns around and he comes back, and when he's over on the side of the road, he comes up, and let me see how they go. One of them has got one of these things in his tire already.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
And I think it was the motorcycle guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he picked one up, and his tire's going, psst. And he said, oh, damn, look at this. And he pulls this thing out, and he says, well, look at this thing. I'm going to show this to the captain. And he says, well, that's what you get for riding down the side of the road. Ha, 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 you know. And so then they say, well, why don't you guys pull over there into the gas station? So we're supposed to go over to the gas station. So we do that. And here comes another one, another cop car. And he comes up, and he's going, as he pulls up. And I'm starting to sweat a little, you know. I got a pocket full of these things. And the cop is writing us a ticket, and they're, you know, you can see something is starting to bubble in there a little bit. But he gives us a ticket, and off we go. And I thought, damn, we're really lucky to, you know, get out of that one. So, because we made it to People's Park, and they had used it. The students had used this Cambodia thing to tear down the fence. They put up this cyclone fence around People's Park.
Right.
And we had a meeting out here in Canyon between a lot of the people who were involved in People's Park to try and figure out how to get rid of that fence. And people had ideas about thermite and trucks and bulldozers. We were going to do something rather spectacular, and nobody could come up with any remote chance of working.
Success, right?
Well, the Cambodia invasion happens. All of a sudden, the people in Berkeley just spontaneously
tore down the fence.
Tore down the fence with their bare hands, man. They'd climb up on this thing, pull one of these posts over 90 degrees, rip it back up with a big chunk of asphalt, and toss it out in the middle of the damn street, and roll the whole thing up. It was a huge pile of cyclone fence and these posts and asphalt and everything. When we got there, that's what we saw. I couldn't believe it, you know. This goddamn thing was piled up in the middle of the street. And there was all these cops with all their riot gear and everything kind of storming around, you know, looking ugly and nasty, and not a damn thing they could do about it. So we had brought a couple of plants to plant at People's Park. That's what we had in our other pockets, these little seedlings and things. And so we went over to plant a few little things in People's Park, and it immediately was surrounded by about 10 Berkeley PD. And so they wanted to know what we were doing. We came to plant some plants. All right, they patted us down, and I had already gotten rid of my Z-nails. But Tom still had his roofing nails. No,
Oh.
actually, I think I still had some in my pockets, but they didn't search me. They searched Tom and they found the roofing nails.
Uh-huh.
He said, I'm a roofer. You know?
Right. Right on.
And that was it.
So the thing being pulled over by the side of the road going to the Gilman exit, that was it?
Yeah, yeah.
So that was it. That's how it got resolved. They shook Tom down, but they didn't.
They didn't pat me down.
They didn't pat you down.
And they really didn't do anything.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
They came that close, you know, to figuring something was.
About Buckminster Fuller wanting an operating manual for planet Earth.
The spaceship Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he kind of feels that wow, this is a tough one. It's like there's a certain feeling, a lot of people have it. I mean, if there ever was an alien, it's Bucky. Somebody who came for a short visit, you know.
Uh-huh.
I mean, Lester Young's another one,
Yeah. And
But,
Lester Young played horn back when.
Oh, Lester Young, he's a great tenor player from the 30s and 40s.
30s and 40s,
He
right.
died. He and Billie Holiday were closely associated, and they died within months of each other. They gave each other the names Lady Day and Chris.
And you see a connection between far out thinking Buckminster Fuller and
Original.
and Lester Young, original
in the case of
playing.
Lester Young, an original personality. That phrase popped into my mind about visiting for a short time, because that's what I think it was Sonny Rollins said that about Lester Young in the Ken Burns thing on jazz, and they were showing some still shots of Lester, and he looks. I mean, he wore this pork pie hat that looks like a flying saucer, even, you know. And the guy was completely original in everything he did. He was original in his speech.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the hipster terms from the 40s and 50s were Lester's normal speech.
Mm-hmm. And Bucky Fuller originated.
He had his own language.
Yeah.
And he had his marvelous interpretation of history, especially Western history. But I mean, there's just no end to it. The ironic thing about Buckminster Fuller is that he's mainly known for the geodesic dome, and that's the one thing he didn't invent.
Who did?
It was a German in about 1923 or 24
Okay.
in East Germany.
And Bucky just kind of pushed that.
Well, Bucky at the time was a bohemian living in the village, and he was publishing a little journal called Shelter. And he was hanging out in North Beach with all the artists and everything. He'd already dropped out of Harvard, been kicked out actually. And, you know, he was a son of the blue blood class, but had no money. Their family had no money. And so he was interested in things having to do with technology, and particularly environmental technology. And so in Jena, 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 East Germany, which is Germany then, and is again, this fellow was working Bauersfeld, or what was his name? I don't remember. It was a German, probably an engineer, who was associated with the Zeiss optical works.
Mm.
And they made planetaria, lenses.
Mm.
And the issue with planetariums is that you have to have a perfect sphere to project them on. And this guy figured out a way to build an armature out of steel and then essentially cover it with ferro cement, and it would be mathematically perfect for one of these centrally located multi-lens planetarium projectors that Zeiss was marketing.
So
he made this thing without calling it a geodesic dome or anything. It was just a solution to a problem, and it was absolutely brilliant. And Bucky was probably the only person in the world that recognized it for what it was. And so it just kind of simmered in the back of his fertile mind for many years while he was himself concentrating on other types of structures. But around the time of World War II, he started working with portable metal structures, the kind that he used for agricultural hoppers and things, silos, all that kind of stuff. A Butler manufacturing company made them. And what they needed was they needed shelter for the airmen in Iran who were transporting aircraft to the Soviets, who were meeting them in Iran and flying them on. So he had to build this base in the middle of nowhere. And so he designed these things made out of sections of these silos, and they could all be, reassembled over
And
there.
the he you're referring to is?
Bucky.
Okay,
And
you're
that's
actually
how
talking.
he sort of started off in that direction.
I got it.
And he found out all the advantages of this type of construction. They weren't geodesic domes by any stretch of the imagination. That was something that came about probably incrementally. He first came up with the first cartographic patent since Mercator, a new way of depicting the spherical Earth on a flat piece of paper. And the way he did it was he took an icosahedron, which is a very rough sphere. It's made up of triangles. Takes 20 of them, which is what icosa means in Greek. You have 20 equilateral triangles. They will form a sphere. And so you can unfold that. You can,
brilliant.
And they're it's going to kind of spread out in different ways. So then you can print the map of the Earth on there, and depending on how you unfold this thing, you can leave all the continents connected, or you can leave all the oceans connected. So he calls it the water ocean world, the air ocean world, different things.
The whole Earth catalog picture of the Earth being on the
distortion. There's no Greenland looking bigger than Australia, for instance.
Right.
As you have on the Mercator. There's no way to do an orange peel projection, which is what the Mercator is, without tremendous distortion at the pole. The further you go down the poles, the greater the distortion.
Oh, yeah.
With this one, the distortion is equal over all the way.
All the parts.
And so you can arrange it any way you want for whatever purpose that suits you. And you'll see things pretty much as they are, even on the sphere. It's even an improvement on the sphere.
Amazing.
You can see the whole thing at once. And so he patented this thing. It's called the Dymaxion, which is one of his favorite words. He uses it for a lot of his stuff. The Dymaxion world projection. You can buy it anywhere now. Well, that is, in essence, a geodesic dome. The icosahedron consists of all these equilateral triangles, 20 of them. And you can take an equilateral triangle and you can make it into a spherical triangle by doing a little mathematical wizardry, and have many more smaller triangles to make up this, to replace this flat one. And then every one is treated the same all the way around. Once you've solved this one triangle, it turned it into a kind of a spherical shape by shortening the edges and calculating them, and all that, making a bunch of little triangles.
So it's expansion and contraction.
The more times you break it down, the closer it gets to a true sphere.
So,
and that's what geodesic dome is, and he figured that out. But Bauersfeld, or whoever this guy is, he had done it the first.
Right. But Bucky actually had a way of thinking, original thinking that was really, in a way, this was just one of the manifestations.
What it really boils down to is the Malthusian doctrine. Thomas Malthus, the economist of the East India Company, who was the first world-around economist, the first one to exist in an empire that knew what the limits were, that you just couldn't go on forever, that we knew what the whole world was, because we have the British Navy going everywhere. And so there's only so much resources, and there's so many people, and he finally figured out, as he's getting all this data, economic data coming across his desk from the East India Company in India and everywhere, that the human population is increasing exponentially while the goods and things that we're producing are only increasing arithmetically. So this means that we'll never have enough, no matter how hard we try, to feed everybody and take care of everybody. So the idea is to always be on the top of the heap and at least make it worth the miserable short lives that these others live, if you can at least live in civilization and advanced humanity. That's kind of a white man's burden concept of survival of the fittest and everything.
Right.
And all these rich kids like Bucky, they're all told this in one form or another when they're kids. Their grandpa or uncle takes them aside and says, "This is the way it is, kid. Just be glad that you're who you are and where you are. And if your grandmother ever had to hear this, it'll break her heart. But you, my boy, have to carry on."
Right.
And this is what every American believes. They've all been sold this, even though they're working slobs.
And he chose to step out of that thinking and break it down.
Yeah, he questioned it because he started he started examining this other thing that's not taken into the equation, which is technology, the evolution of technology. Ephemeralization is the word he uses. That means you're constantly improving technology and doing more with less. For example, at the time of World War I, that was the first electronic war. Mm-hmm. They were stringing copper wire everywhere and communicating and even developing wireless communication. But they were, we had control of the Andean copper and also in Arizona, so we were in the saddle. We were in a very powerful position. And we've mined all this copper, and we run these wires everywhere. You see those over there. The whole planet is covered with this wire that has been pulled out of the earth over all these years, these 70, 80 years, whatever it's been. And now it's practically all surplus because we're beginning to communicate with wireless.
Right.
All of the stuff that we use is far more efficient than it was before. And so we have way more copper already on the surface than we ever need.
Let me ask you a question just to use his way of thinking, and it's certainly a very vital one. What would we do with nuclear waste in alignment with that thinking?
Well, the problem is there really shouldn't be any nuclear
to begin with,
it
right? Ideally, but there is
needed.
Right.
It isn't needed. We have a perfectly serviceable thermonuclear reactor, which I'm hooked up to. It's 93 million miles away, where it belongs, and we don't need one next door. It's just utter stupidity.
So what do we do with the nuclear waste that does exist? According to that thinking, less is more. Is there a biotechnology we talked about having?
I guess what you have to
eventually some kind of
is entomb the stuff.
Break it down
in some way that's really permanent. I mean, it's going to be hugely expensive, and it's going to be a big problem, and we're going to have to do it. But the point is that we do not have anything called nuclear power. It doesn't exist.
Good.
What we have is simply ordinary power. That is, boiling water to run a turbine to make electricity. And instead of using a myriad of means of spinning those turbines, including magnetism, including photovoltaic technology, including wind power, there's just a million ways it can be done. The military-industrial complex wants us to do it using nuclear fuel, which will boil water. But don't call that nuclear energy. That's not nuclear energy.
Just using another product.
That's simply taking weapons-grade material, which you're subsidizing by building these power plants. What you're doing is subsidizing the arms industry. You're creating a huge demand for this weapons-grade material.
Yeah,
and that's why we're doing it. Now, it makes a great deal of sense to use nuclear power for things such as running an aircraft carrier around or blowing up something, because it has a ratio of concentrated power to weight that's unequal in any other form.
Right.
But for producing power on planet Earth, it's completely ridiculous. They say that obviously it isn't efficient, because look at the costs, the actual costs every time they can't lie anymore. You're concentrating all this energy into a pill, but how much energy did it take you to do that?
Right.
It took way more.
Can I excerpt this for a piece I want to do for a Quaker journal?
Sure.
There's an argument going back and forth about use of nuclear energy, and
nuclear energy is a fraud.
And it is a fraud.
Totally.
Totally.
You know, when I was in school, when I was a kid, in grammar school, we used to get all these audio-visual aids, these movies, these horrible things, and sometimes you get to run the projector.
Right.
And we'd get them from everybody, usually from the Dairy Institute.
Right. I remember those things.
Then we got them from
and that music background, remember?
Yeah. Atoms for peace. and we get the ready kilowatt and all this stuff, and the little guy running around. And they'd have the guy standing out there in front of a humongous long carloads of coal siding. You know, you couldn't see the end of this train. And it's all loaded with these hoppers full of coal piled to the top. And then the guy's standing in front of it, and he's holding this little pea-sized thing, and he says, "A pellet of nuclear fuel this size has more energy than this entire 2-mile-long train loaded with coal." And, oh, wow, yeah. And when we start, making our atoms for peace and our nuclear power plants, the energy will be so cheap that it will cost more for the 3-cent stamp that it will take to send you the bill than the bill will be, and so it'll be free. And that's what they told us little kids.
Little kids.
Between times when we were ducking under the desk, to get away from the real.
Well, now we have yellow alerts and orange alerts, and we stop any kind of Middle Eastern person that we're suspicious of, but life goes on, and Barry, that was a beautiful description of that propaganda that occurred. But out of your own knowledge about this, it seems like that there's a lot of people who don't really know this. Actually, in truth.
Well, of course they don't.
And truth. And I want to just excerpt this for another piece because I think it's extremely, very valuable information. But anyway, let's get on to where we're going with this. Coming back to Canyon and Canyon politics and using this less is more philosophy that you learned from Bucky Fuller. This is how you've lived your life in a lot of ways. I mean, less is more.
Yeah.
And that you get to be with who? You get to be with yourself and the universe, the plants, and
well, I've been fortunate.
Animals.
I've never taken out a loan. That's probably the thing that has determined my way of doing things more than anything else. I've always dealt with what I can acquire by either working for it or saving up for it or borrowing actual sweat equity or something like that.
So the economy is ecological. There's
I'm
no
not paying interest to the ruling elite banking establishment, and that's really what people don't realize when they buy something.
Or credit cards and all that
are
shit.
limiting their options in the future. They're going to have to be tied into whatever that system is.
Yeah, totally.
And if you can figure out a way, to get along without all of that, then you're going to have a different experience. And my life hasn't been without difficulty. I've been successful in my family situation and everything because of all this, but
because you think less is more kind of thinking influence that your family broke down?
Well, I went through Reaganomics, trying to raise 4 kids and a wife and her horses, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't couldn't find enough work, and so things broke up. Possibly if I'd been committed to that job I had at Standard Oil when I was a young man, if I'd stayed there forever, I could have weathered that. But I don't regret it.
Yeah. But it's kind of like a choice we make somewhere along the way and when you do have a family, it becomes a whole different reality, which none of us really know until we're there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I regret in my life, is I didn't give my kids more possibility in terms of their future. Not that my kids aren't great and I dig them to pieces and they're wonderful human beings, but they could have gotten more from Tom and I in a less kind of way. Not like that we have to subscribe to middle class, but we could have come up with a more creative plan. And I believe
because you were who you were.
Well,
and you guys were doing the very best you could. I can attest to that.
Yeah.
And you did far more.
Yeah, we did a lot.
Than most people could even imagine.
Yeah.
And I mean, don't ever beat yourself up for things that you weren't able to do for your kids.
You did
so much for them.
You're very cool, Barry.